I've gotten the impression that the DA has really given up uh, targeting that segment of the electorate which is considered hungry and poor, as if that segment of the population can in South Africa can only ever respond to socialism and welfare grants and things like that, and promising, in the way that the EFF promises poor people things. But this is obviously doesn't have to be the case. I do think that people can begrudgingly, even poor people can begrudgingly vote DA, and I think that it's worth to make that it's worthy to get into that form of negative campaigning, because that negative campaigning will be the root of so much empowerment, essentially telling people that they are politically powerful, that their vote matters, their vote counts, and that they actually have a lot of power over their situation in terms of choosing their government. That would be the implication of targeting the poor in electoral campaigns, and also blaming the poor for the state of the country to some extent. Because, I do think it's legit. This wouldn't be part of the campaign, but this is kind of where it goes and where the train of thinking leads you. But, do the poor of South Africa deserve a government that can keep the lights on? I think that's a perfectly legitimate question. I wouldn't include that in this campaign exactly, but that's the flavor of thinking that does need to be entertained. And entertaining that question leads to a lot of empowerment. It really does, on behalf of people who are already politically empowered by the democracy. Now, getting the DA into that kind of negative campaigning also, at the same time, simultaneously will flush out all the myths that are in the works, around the DA. I don't know if anyone actually believes this, but I've been told rumors that some people believe or are lied to that if the ANC loses power, that apartheid will return, or some shit like that, some made up bullshit like that. So the DA getting into negative campaigning, blaming the electorate for the state of the country. And I've seen John Steenhuisen make small comments like this, but this is not the same thing as actually having a proper campaign, and this is the problem with the DA, is that it's too fluffy. It's much too much fluff and just positive campaigning and things like that. And yes, obviously there is a lot that can be done by NGOs and the Free Market Foundation and the Institute of Race Relations, in also, let's say, spreading democratic literacy, which has been so brutally devastated by the state of politics in South Africa, which is hideous. The level at which it's at, and the race baiting, etc., etc. But just focusing on dispelling the obvious boogeymen, on clearing out the obvious myths that are in the works, it's worthy work to do. And I do think that there is space to begrudgingly compel people to vote DA through clever campaigning. And that's the kind of campaigning I think that also will pay off in the medium term and not just in the short term. Perhaps it'll be a shock in the short term, but it's some work that needs to start at some point. And the willingness of the DA effectively to just give up on capturing the poor into their electoral partisanship, I think becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of its own limitations of building itself up as a party, or in terms of garnering more support. Because then, at the same time, it will get into the political debate in the way that it really wants to get into the political debate in terms of its ideological distinctiveness. Those sorts of things don't even enter the arena because the DA is not willing to get into any kind of negative campaigning. Of the ideological sort, Only ever safe messages, only ever, sort of stop the corruption, stop the steal, stop mismanagement, stop the ANC. But, the DA has always shirked, when accusations have come against the DA has seemingly backed down in terms of its electoral strategies. It's never taken the fight, to the part of the problem that really is a large part of the problem, which is the electorate itself. The state of the country is a reflection of the electorate's decision making, its election, its choice to put who it chooses into government. And without that basic tenet of democratic literacy put on a pedestal and put into the forefront, I think there's a kind of dishonesty. There's a kind of glaring, that the onus really is on the poor to make their lives better through their political power. And if they're not even willing to do that, then, quite frankly, I don't think that we deserve to have the lights on. Because we live in a country with the majority of people that are, quite frankly, the moral corruption and how they have allied themselves with moral corruption. And I think that those arguments are worth trotting out, the betrayal of non-racialism. Essentially, apartheid has been reintroduced into the law under the ANC government, and no one bats an eye, and no one will even bring that out as a major argument against the ANC. It's quite frankly disgusting. But I mean, these are all things that can be laid at the feet of ANC supporters. And, the state corruption, I think, is a very clear symptom of moral corruption. But the moral corruption happened first, and no one is challenging it openly. Not even the DA. The DA is ideologically opposed to it, but they won't even campaign on it. So there's a lot of silence, and there's a lot of, I would even call it, sort of demonic ideology happening in the space given. There's a lot of horrible myths that have to that fill that vacuum. Because the political argument or the ideological argument is so far removed from, the ground zero reality. What's actually happening. And we don't have political parties that seemingly are strong enough to morally center us again and to bring us back into focus of reality. Or they take it as too much of a political risk to do so. And so we are stuck. Fighting battles which are the wrong battles to be fighting, in my view. Getting involved in the leftists' diversionary identity politics because those are the things that are flourishing in the space ceded over to the opposing ideology. So just having these ideologically lines cleared up would at least bring democratic literacy back into the fore, back into the center ground, as to what the proximate cause of South Africa's downfall is that we either have an electorate which is asleep at the wheel, or that is voting, for such vile reasons, which really mean that is so patently morally corrupt and anti-constitutional that really, when you have so many people who are willing to throw the Constitution under the bus, well, what do you expect? We live in an abject, constitutionally invalid way vis-a-vis the law and the government, and how that's just been silently papered over by everyone. And even the DA, I think, is complicit in being silent on these. I mean, where is the DA's shadow public protector? Where's the shadow public protector on these issues? Just cowards. I mean, it does make me wonder, how close we are to recreating Weimar Germany, the downfall of Weimar Germany and its displacement by Nazi Germany, that and how the liberals made concessions. And I do think that these ideological concessions, and they are ideological concessions, not bringing the fight, not making the lines clear, that there's a risk attached to that. And that's really a long-term risk, because what you allow in your silence or cowardly retreat becomes entrenched, it becomes institutionalized in the culture, in the political culture of the opposing ideology. You're giving it space to live unabated. You're letting it fester and to, for the infection to take hold. And so, what's going to happen then when suddenly that thing threatens the entire life of the host? It's going to be too late for the medicine, because the medicine is going to kill the host just as much as the infection will. So at some point we need, the cold water to wake us up. And who's going to provide that? Who's going to actually politically inject that into the system? And if it's not going to be the DA, I don't know who.